ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಸರ್.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಸರ್.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ನೀವು ನೋಡಿದ್ರೇನೆ ಒಂದು ಆನಂದ ಸರ್.
ನನಗೂ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ನೋಡಕ್ ಬಹಳ ಸಂತೋಷ. ಡೂಯಿಂಗ್ ಗುಡ್ ವರ್ಕ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್. ಯುವರ್ ಬ್ಲೆಸ್ಸಿಂಗ್ಸ್, ಆಲ್ ಯುವರ್ ಬ್ಲೆಸ್ಸಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಸರ್.
ನಮಸ್ಸರ್ವೇಭ್ಯಃ. ಗುರುರೇವ ಗತಿರ್ಗುರುಮೇವ ಭಜೆ ಗುರುಣೈವ ಸಹಾಸ್ಮಿ ನಮೋ ಗುರವೇ ನ ಗುರೋಃ ಪರಮಂ ಶಿಶುರಸ್ಮಿ ಗುರೋಃ ಮತಿರಸ್ತಿ ಗುರೌ ಮಮ ಪಾಹಿ ಗುರೋ ಬ್ರವೀಮಿ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಂ ವಾಚಾ ಧ್ಯಾಯಾಮಿ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಂ ಹೃದಾ ಕುರ್ವೇ ಸೇವಾಂಚ ಕಾಯೇನ ವಂದೇ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಮಾತರಂ. ಯೋ ನರಃ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ವ್ಯೋಮ್ನಿ ಹ್ಯಾಲಯಂ ರಮತೆ ಮುದಾ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಂ ಚೈವ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಂ ವಿಂದತೆ ನಾತ್ರ ಸಂಶಯಃ. ನಮಸ್ಸಭಾಭ್ಯಃ ಸಭಾಪತಿಭ್ಯಶ್ಚ. ವ್ಯೋಮ-ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ-ಪಾಠಶಾಲಾಯಾः दशमानोत्सव संदर्भे आयोज्यमानायाः अस्याः विशिष्ट उपन्यासमालिकायाः द्वितीये उपन्यासे सर्वेषां स्वागतम्. अद्य अस्मान् उद्बोधयितुं करुणया अङ्गीकृत्य अस्माभिः सह उपस्थिताः सन्ति प्राचार्याः के.एस्. कण्णन् महाभागाः. तेभ्यः साञ्जलिबन्धं नमस्कारान् विधाय व्योमसंस्थापक्षतः हार्दं स्वागतं वच्मि. उपन्यासतः पूर्वं किञ्चिदिव आचार्याणां परिचयं कारयितुम् इच्छामि। कण्णन् महाभागाः सम्प्रति चेन्नैनगरे भारतीयप्रौद्योगिकीसंस्था IIT इत्यत्र संत राजेंद्र सिंह जी महाराज चेर् इत्यस्मिन् एतत् सम्माननीयं पदम् अधितिष्ठन्तः संस्कृतसेवानिरताः सन्ति। अधिक-40 वर्षेभ्यः संस्कृत अध्यापननिरताः इमे आचार्याः। पूर्वं बेंगलुरु नगरे नेशनल कॉलेज इत्यस्यां संस्थायां यदा ते अध्यापनरताः आसन् तदा एतेषां परिचयस्य सौभाग्यं मया प्राप्तम्। कण्णन् महाभागानाम् आसक्तिः पाण्डित्यम् इत्युभयम् अतिविशालं वर्तते। तेषां गृहं यदि वयं गच्छामः तत्र ग्रन्थानां स्थानमेव महद् भवति। आदौ ग्रन्थानां कृते स्थानं प्रकल्प्य ततः यत्र यदवशिष्यते तत्र वयं वसामः इति धिया एव ते सर्वदापि व्यवहरन्ति। अपि च विशेषः न केवलं ग्रन्थाः सन्ति इति, तत्तु प्रायः बहूनां गृहे अस्पृष्टानां पुस्तकानां महासङ्ग्रहः अपि भवेत्। किन्तु किं पुस्तकं कुत्र अस्ति, तत्र के विषयाः सन्ति, केन प्रकाशितम् इत्यादि सर्वमपि आचार्याणां हृद्गतं भवति इति महान् विशेषः। मम सर्वदा तान् दृष्ट्वा तेषाम् अध्ययनशीलत्वं दृष्ट्वा महती प्रेरणा प्राप्यते। न केवलं ग्रन्थानाम् अध्ययने किन्तु ग्रन्थप्रणयने अपि अत्यन्तं कुशलाः कण्णन् महाभागाः। प्रायः 30 अधिकाः ग्रन्थाः तैः विरचिताः सन्ति। शतशः लेखाः अपि विलिखिताः सन्ति। संस्कृतभाषा, आङ्ग्लभाषा, कन्नडभाषा इति सर्वत्रापि महत् पाटवं वर्तते। तेषां ग्रन्थेषु दृग्गोचरः अंशः छात्रोपयोगित्वम् इति। अध्येतॄणां कृते केन प्रकारेण आनुकूल्यं कल्पनीयं, कथं विचारः प्रस्तोतव्यः इति अहर्निशं विचिन्त्य वारं वारं विचारं कृत्वा तैः प्रत्येकं ग्रन्थस्य प्रणयनं क्रियते। पुस्तकप्रकाशने प्रूफ् रीडिङ्ग्, एडिटिङ्ग् इत्यादि ये अंशाः सन्ति तत्र कण्णन् महाभागानां एक्स्पर्टीस् बहु महत् विद्यते। प्रायः तैः सह कार्यकरणस्य अनुभवेनैव तत् ज्ञातं भवति कियता श्रमेण तैः एकैकस्य ग्रन्थस्य प्रकाशनं क्रियते इति। अस्माकं धर्मसंरक्षणेपि कटिबद्धाः आचार्याः। स्वदेशी इंडोलॉजी सीरीज इत्यस्य शैक्षणिकनिर्देशकाः। बहूनां सम्मेलनानाम् आयोजनं, तत्र लेखानां प्रकाशनम् इत्येतेषु मुख्यं दायित्वं तेषाम् आसीत्। नैकैः बिरुदैः सम्माननैः अपि विभूषिताः कण्णन् महाभागाः। तत्र श्री श्री रङ्गप्रिय महास्वामिभिः अनुगृहीतं विद्यानिधिः इति बिरुदं, राष्ट्रीय संस्कृत विद्यापीठेन प्रदत्तं डीलिट् इत्यादि विशेषम् उल्लेखमर्हन्ति। अद्य अस्माकं प्रार्थनाम् अङ्गीकृत्य अत्र समागताः इत्यतः कार्तज्ञं व्याहरामि। संस्कृतसाहित्ये हास्यरसः, ह्यूमर् इन् संस्कृत लिटरेचर् इति विषयम् अधिकृत्य अस्मान् उद्बोधयन्तु इति सविनयं प्रार्थये। कण्णन्।
नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अत्यन्तं सुभगया संस्कृतभाषया भाषितवती श्रीमती सौम्या कृष्णापुरमहोदया संस्कृतभाषायां ह्यूमर्, हास्यरसः इति विषयम् अमुम् अधिकृत्य किञ्चित् वक्तव्यम् इति प्रार्थितं व्योमसंस्था अधिकारिभिः। मया तु तदैव पृष्टं भाषणं संस्कृतभाषया भवतु वा आङ्ग्लभाषया भवतु वा इति। तैश्च आङ्ग्लभाषयैव भवतु इति उक्तम् इत्यतः कृत्वा मया आङ्ग्लभाषामेव आश्रित्य संस्कृतभाषा लभ्यं हास्यरसम् अधिकृत्य किञ्चित् प्रस्तूयते. I am extremely thankful to the authorities of Linguistic for inviting me to share a few thoughts on humor in Sanskrit. Actually, I am giving you a bonus. I'll be speaking on a slightly modified topic without seeking the permission of the organizers. So this itself may be considered a piece of humor, because humor also involves transgression. So I'll be speaking on wit and humor in Sanskrit. So it's difficult to define humor and the borderlines of that. One easy comparison that presents itself is the way tort is defined in law. In law, they say that they have no definition of fraud. After all, law has to deal with issues of fraud. At every step, they have to handle that. But the most funny thing is that there is no definition of fraud. Not only that, even legal terms and a few thousands of legal history, they unequivocally discourage any definition of fraud. Why do they disallow any definition of fraud? Law books say, given the ingenuity of the human mind, it is very important not to define fraud, because the human mind will always invent ways and means to circumvent law and commit fraud more easily the moment it gets defined. And similar is the case with humor, and they say that humor defies a universally acceptable definition, and they also say that it is partly due to its multi-dimensional nature and ability to produce both positive and negative responses. Therefore, there is no easy definition of humor, and I will be speaking on wit and humor as it obtains in Sanskrit literature. And one thing that I must caution right at the beginning is that not all jokes evoke laughter in all. I had known of a person in Bangalore who was running an organization called Humour Club International, and one of the jokes he said was this. It was an open forum. People could come and tell their jokes, and all would laugh and all that. And once he said, you see, so many people come and share their jokes here. And if people laugh and enjoy the joke, they take full credit for that. And if the joke falls flat or is a failure, they say that this is vyoma-samskrta-pathasala's joke. So that's how people compensate for the absence of humor in their jokes. And secondly, if you open any book on jokes, you will find that the more classified and the more systematized the presentation is, it ceases to evoke laughter uniformly, even for jokes that could be really enjoyed, because once some pattern is seen, so a second joke or a third joke which contains the same essence will be seen as less of a joke and looks more like a repetition and evokes less laughter. And anyhow, there will always be people who will be critical of a person who cranks jokes and presents humor. And I had a classmate in my high school who was duly chastised by my teacher. He said, regarding a teacher who would crack my jokes in the class, he said, "Oh, sir, he is a funny teacher." And then my teacher said, "Stupid fellow, don't call your teacher funny. You call him a humorous teacher." So there is a difference between funny and humorous. So I don't know. Some of the things that I may present today may look funny rather than humorous to many. And that is why Subhash Takara says, well, there are fault finders everywhere. And he says, I bow down to them first. Durjanam prathamam vande, sajjanam tadanantaram, mukha praksharanat purvam, guda praksharanam yatha. Even as one washes one's hind the first and goes to wash his face only afterwards. So we must take care of the people who are inimical and who are censorious, that is given to fault finding. In this talk, it will not be a historical survey of how humor has been presented in Sanskrit. So if it is a very formal presentation, one would have to start with the Vedic suktas and then make a survey of the literature as it has developed and make a selection of them and assess them and so on. So that is not the idea here at all. There are, of course, exclusive works on humor in Sanskrit, like Kalivadambana, so of Nilakanta Dikshita. So I have given many talks on the very work, and therefore I'll try to exclude verses from that, excepting maybe some 2 or 3 verses. And you can see that even in the Vedas, the Brahmanas for reciting the Vedas are compared to a batch of mandukas or frogs, so which make their noise with the onset of rains and so on. And even in the Ramayana, we have humorous situations where, for example, as it is said, Hasyam Shurpanakha Mukhe, the Shurpanakha Prasanga is one that is full of humor. And in the Mahabharata, we have the episodes where in the Maya Nirmita Bhavana, there are funny situations which you all know, and therefore I would not look into those things. And we all know of episodes and pieces from Mrichakatika and Mudra Rakshasa and the works of Kalidasa and Bhasa. In fact, Bhasa has been called Bhaso Hasaha, so of Kavita Kamini. And therefore, if you look into his just Pratigna Yogandarayana or Saptamavasavata, you get very many situations where the Hatyarasa is very well depicted. And coming to more recent times, so we have a work like Kantakanjali, so written by Kantakarjuna, so the pseudonym of K. Sarjun Wadkar, who has written a Shataka, which is very contemporaneous in content and so on. We also have among some of the modern writers or the recent modern writers, the text like Sita Ravana Samvada Jhari, or the works of S. Jagannatha and R. Ganesh and so on, so which have humor as their central theme. In Bhoja Charitra also we get very many episodes, so maybe I'll decide 1 or 2 shlokas from that. But one thing that is notable is the total absence of humor in the entire Bible and Quran. And this point is not being made out by me. One of the greatest intellectuals and philosophers of our own times, A.N. Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, he has made this statement: the total absence of humor from the Bible is one of the most singular things in literature. So that is not the case with our scriptural literature. And we find many examples of our own poets and devotees making fun of our own gods, and even the gods do not take offense to that. So in Bharata's Natya Shastra, we get detailed treatments of the definition of hasya and its Sthāyi bhava, vibhava, anubhava, sanchari bhava, and so on. All these have been very well detailed and discussed. So I will not go into those things, but I only like to refer to one verse which says, Na prapnuvanti munayo ruditena moksham. It's not by crying that sages attain moksha. Swargayatim na parihasa katha runadhi. And if you crack jokes and tell stories of fun and wit and humor, that's not going to block your attainment of heaven. Tasmas pratita manasa hasitavyameva. And therefore one ought to be laughing with an open mind. Vrittim budhena khalu kaurukuchim vihaya. I do not know how this word kaurukuchi vritti is derived, but I have seen it translated as hypocrisy or some such thing, some such equivalent. And therefore, leaving out all hypocrisy, so one must really have a hearty laugh. And therefore, this is presented as a good dictum and as something that welcomes people laughing. Now, we may begin with a few verses where we can laugh at our own gods or our own gods indulging in wit and humor and banter and so on. And while describing these, our poets have very well exploited the abilities of the language. So especially the polysemy that obtains in abundance in Sanskrit has been very well exploited. I can immediately think of one example from Sri Krishna Karnamrita of Leela, wherein he depicts a gopi going to Krishna's house, or rather Krishna going to Gopi's house, perhaps with appointment, and she knows very well that it is Krishna who has come and he is knocking at the door, and yet she takes pleasure in teasing him a bit. And so when he is knocking at the door, she asks from inside the house, so who is knocking at the door? Angulya kahkavatam praharati. And because she knew that he was coming and is asking this question mischievously, Krishna says, you crooked girl, I am Madhava, kutile Madhavaha. And immediately preaching upon the other sense of the word Madhava. Madhava means Lord of Ma or Vishnu, that is of Lakshmi, and therefore it means Vishnu. And anyhow, Madhava is a well-known name of Krishna. And the words Madhu and Madhava refer to the Vasanta Ritu. And therefore she asks, Kim Vasantaha? Angulya kahkavatam praharati kutile Madhava Kim Vasantaha. Then he says, no, Chakri. So no is a Sanskrit word very much. So he says, I am a Chakri because Vishnu is known as Chakradhara. So I wield the discus. And therefore, I am the person who is famously known as the wielder of the discus. And the word Chakri can also mean a person who handles the wheel. So therefore, she asks, Kim Kulalaha, are you a potter? Because he too deals with the wheel regularly. And therefore, she asks, are you the potter? And then he says, Nahi dharani dharaha. No, I am the supporter of the earth. So there is a saying in Sanskrit, Na Vishnu Prithivipatihi. So else than Lord Vishnu, there can be no king. So that sthiti amsha is there in every king. So if he conducts himself properly and abides by his duties and so on. In any case, Lord Vishnu sustains the earth and the universe, and therefore he says Dharani Dharaha. But then our mythology also tells that it is Adishesha who is supporting the earth, and therefore she asks, Kim Vijihvaha Phanindraha. So are you the Lord of Serpents, the one with the forked tongue? So obviously there are undertones of ridiculing him. And then he says, quite on the other hand, I am the person who trampled upon the serpent. Naham ghorahi mardi. And a similar attribute can be found in the an exploit can be found in the tale of Garuda also. Kimasi khagapatihi. And then he says, no, harihi, no, I am Hari. And the word Hari also can mean a monkey. King kapindraha. Ityevam gopakanya prativachanajitaha patuvaha chakrapanihi. So it says, so may Lord Krishna, who was thus defeated by the gopi, so may he protect you. So we find that this kind of interesting conversations between our own divinities are taking place, and very well recorded by the great devotees. There is another verse which makes fun of Shiva in a way. So it says, look at the fate of the Lord. Swayam Maheshaha. So he is himself called Mahesha, the great Lord. Shvashuro Nageshaha. And his father-in-law is the king of mountains, the Himalayas. Sakha Dhaneshaha. His friend is Kubera, the Lord of wealth. Tanayo Ganeshaha. And his son is Ganesha, the Lord of troops. Tathapi Bhikshatanameva Shambho Baliyasi Kevalam Ishwarecha. So nevertheless, Lord Shiva has to live by raising alms, and indeed Ishwarecha Baliyasi. So the will of the Lord is supreme. Another verse says, brings out the extreme dependence of Lord Shiva upon his wife. He says, the Lord Shiva is known as Panchamukha, Swayam Panchamukha. And what about his sons? Putrau Gajanana Shadanana. So one is Gajanana, so you can imagine how much he may eat, and the other is Shadanana, so he has 6 faces and how much he may consume, and therefore Digambara Katham Jivet Annapurnana Ched Grihe. So himself, the Lord is Digambara, and how can he live and how can he make ends meet and manage his family? Were it not for Annapurna at home, Annapurna Nached Grihe. Another verse brings out the reason for the addresses of the Vishnu or Shiva or Lakshmi. And it says, Himalaye Harashyete Harishyete Mahodadhau. So Lord Shiva sleeps in Himalaya and Vishnu in the ocean. Kamale Kamala Shete, and Lakshmi resides in the lotus. Do you know why? Manye Matkuna Shankaya. So probably it is because of the bugs in the bed. So probably the poet himself was suffering on account of the bugs too much, and therefore he thinks that this is the solution that is devised by the divinities. And the poet says, Asare khalu samsare. So in this samsara, which is really devoid of all meaning and enjoyment, Saram Swashara Mandiram, it is your father-in-law's house that is the excellent resort. So once again, so Himalaya Harashete and then Harishete Mohozozi. Lord Shiva sleeps in his father-in-law's house and Lord Vishnu in his father-in-law's house. And therefore, this shows that it's best to be in father-in-law's house because you are treated there very well. I'm reminded of another verse which brings out the merits of sleeping or staying in one's father-in-law's house. It says, Shvasharagriha Nivasaha Swargatulyam Nranam. So stay in your father-in-law's house, it is equivalent to heaven. It is paradise indeed, because the son-in-law is treated with great honor and respect and regard, and high attention is paid to him and all that. Now it is said of Bharavi that he wrote this line in the bathroom of his father-in-law's house. So, and The next day, when he went to have his bath, he saw a second line added there. So, must be one of his shyalas must have written that. It said, Yadi vasati viveki panchava shadvinani. If with some balance of mind, with some sense of discrimination, one would stay for just 5 or maximum 6 days in his father-in-law's house. Now, Bharvi could not understand what this meant, and therefore he asked, Dadhi madhu ghrita lobhair masam ekam vase ched. So, as is regularly served, dadhi, curds, madhu, honey, and ghee, ghrita. So, greedy of all this, if a person, should he stay there for over a month, then what would happen? So, there is the third line that he wrote, and the fourth line came the next day. Tadupari dinamekam padaraksha praharaha. So, one day more and he will be shown the gate. So, that way it shows how sometimes the kind of respect that we get is diminished if we are regular visitors to some place or stay with somebody for too long and so on. There is a saying in Sanskrit, Ati parichayad avajna. So too much of familiarity can breed contempt. Santata gamanad anadaro bhavati. If you keep going to somebody's house very regularly, by and by, you will not be treated with the same honor as you would have been treated on the very first day. And then, Malaye dhilla purandri chandana taru kashtham indhanam kurute. So the example that is given is of the Bhil woman. So the woman of the fighter class. So Malaye in the Malaya mountain, she regularly makes use of the sandalwood for heating water. Malaye bhilla purandri chandana taru kashtham indhanam kurute. Now in the Ramayana, there is a situation of Sita being rescued and being received after the slaying of Ravana. And the monkeys are all very, very curious as to how Sita would appear, because it was for her sake that the entire battle took place, and therefore they were naturally very curious. And when Sita ultimately arrived, one of the monkeys described Sita so as to how she looks. Gauri Tanuhu. Oh, she is fair complexioned and looks bright. And then another remark, Nayanam Ayatam. So her eyes are wide. Unnata cha Nasa. She has a prominent nose, which is also good. And then Kati Prithusati cha. And then her hips are big and broad, and therefore that is also a a positive feature. And Pati Vichitra, and her garments, so they are also a variegated structure and color and so on. Angani Loma Rahitani, and she is not hirsute. There is no hair on her body, so which looks a bit odd to the monkeys, because the monkeys are all full of bodily hair. Must note that the poet is careful in using the word loma here. Loma or Roma refers to the hair on the body, except on the hair. The body, the hair on the head is called kesha, and on the rest of the body it is called Roma or Loma, and therefore Angani Loma Rahitani. And that must be for the Sukhaya Bhartu. Maybe her husband, that is Rama, feels very happy, and it's more conducive to his happiness when he should embrace her. And one monkey pointed out that there is one glaring defect, namely that she doesn't have even a small tail. Pucham na tucham. So even a tucha pucha is not there. Iti kutra samasta vastu. And they generalize and philosophize, saying that after all, you can never find all merits in one place, and therefore it's only natural that she doesn't have these things. So it only shows how we always measure according to our own standards, and we define beauty by our own methods. There are two verses, one describing Shiva and one describing Vishnu. Either they are composed by the same poet, or one is written in imitation of the other. And one shows how Shiva came to smear his body all over with bhasma, so with ashes. And the other, why Murari became wooden, Darubhutaha, as in Jagannatha that you see in Orissa. Now, in the case of Shiva, compare his wives. Eka bharya samara rasika. Durga always is a person with sword in hand and ready to fight. Nimnagacha dvitiya. And the other is always going downwards. Ganga flows downwards. These are the two wives of Lord Shiva. Putrop ekaha dviradavadanaha shanmukhascha dvitiyaha. One has the elephant head and the other has 6 heads. Nandi bringi cha kapivadanam. So Nandi and Bringi have simian faces of monkeys. Vahanam Pungaveshaha, and his vehicle is but a bull. Smaram Swagriha Charitam Bhasmadeho Mahesha. And therefore, looking at the fate of his own house, I think it is for that reason that Lord Shiva, in all his desperation, so smears ashes all his body over. And in the case of Vishnu, there is this situation, Eka Bharya Prakriti Mukhara. Saraswati is also sometimes treated as the spouse of Lord Vishnu. So Eka Bharya Prakriti Mukhara, he is always loquacious, always given to speaking. Chanchala cha Dvitiya, and Lakshmi is known as Chanchala. Putrastveko Bhuvana Vijayi Manmatho Durnivaraha. He has but one son, and he is uncontrollable, Durnivaraha. And though he goes conquering the world, in any case, nobody can control him. Sheshashaya, and for his bed he has but a serpent. Shayana Mudadhav, and to sleep in the ocean. Vahanam Pannagarihi, and his own vehicle is Garuda, the enemy of all serpents. Smaram Swagriha Charitam Darubhuto Murari. So must be Murari became wooden on account of all this pitiable situation of himself. Another shloka gives a poetic reason for Shiva drinking poison. See the family dispute in the house of Lord Shiva. Uttum vanchati vahanam ganapatehe akhum kshudhartaha hani. So Ganapati's vehicle is the rat, and the hungry serpent which Lord Shiva wears on his body. So he is eager to eat that rat. Tancha kraunchapate shikhicha. And then Lord Subramania's vehicle is the peacock, and the peacock wants to grab this serpent. Girija simhopi nagananam, and or this hits on a lion, and the lion is eager to consume the naganana, the elephant head, obviously of Ganesha. Gauri janhusatam asu. And what about Gauri herself? So she is extremely jealous of Ganga. So who is a co-wife of Lord Shiva. Kalanatham kapalanalaha. And then the fire in the kapala of Lord Shiva. So is envious of Kalanatha, the moon, who is given a place on the head of Lord Shiva. Nirvinnaha sapapau krumba kalahat, because of this series of domestic quarrels and difficulties. Ishopi halahalam. So Lord Shiva drank halahala. In the play Mrichakatika, in keeping with the spirit of the play, there is this Nandi verse which brings out how one outwits the other with very intelligent remarks. Now, as usual, Parvati is angry with Shiva, and because he has given a high place to the river Ganga right on his head. So she questions him. So there is a case of serious interrogation. Dhanya keyam sthita shirati. Who is that lucky lady sitting on your head? And he says, Shashikala. So that is the digit of the moon. And Shashikala is typically the name of a girl. And Parvati knows that that is not the name of the moon there. And therefore, she asks, Kinnu nama itadasya? Is it her name? Namai vasya stadetat parichitam apite vismritam kasya hetu. Of course, it is her name, and you know her very well. And why are you asking this? Have you forgotten? And then she says, Narin prichami nendum. I am asking about the Nari and not the Indu, not the moon. So when Lord Shiva replied to Shashikala, he was obviously referring to the single digit of the moon that is there on his head, and he knew what she was trying to say and point out and comment upon, and therefore he intelligently, scrupulously avoids referring to that, and therefore refers to Shashikala. And she says, Narim prichami nendum. I am asking of the woman and not of the moon. Kathayati Vijaya na pramanam yadindu. And then Shiva wittingly fitfully escapes by saying, okay, you ask Vijaya. Kathayati Vijaya na pramanam yadindu. If you think that the moon does not give you a true answer or a proper answer, ask Vijaya. Now here there is a beautiful play on the word Narim Prichami. So where the word Narim can mean both about the woman, or it can also mean I'm asking the woman. So asking the woman or asking of the woman. So both ways it can be translated, and therefore Narim Prichami Nendum, when she says I am asking of the woman, so Lord Shiva interprets as asking the woman, Narim Prichami Nendum, and then Jaya and Vijaya are the two friends of Parvati, and therefore ask your own friend Vijaya. So Kathayati Vijaya na pramanam yadindu. If you think that the moon does not give you a correct answer or a proper answer, then you can ask her. Devya ninhoti michor iti surasaritam shathyam avyad vibhor vaha. So this brazen reply was given by the Lord, and may such a Lord protect us all. So we can see here how just as lawyers in a court of law sometimes resort to equivocation, so the same kind of equivocation is resorted to by Lord Shiva in this verse. Once it seems there was a conflict among the gods themselves. So as to what is the Vigraha Vakya of a word? So it is said that there is a difference of opinion regarding the word Rameshwara. Between Vishnu and Shiva, there is a conflict. And then there is between Rama and Shiva. Rama said it is Shashti Purusha. So Ramasya Ishvaraha Rameshwaraha. And then Lord Shiva says, no, I disagree with you. It is Ramaha Ishvaraha Yasyasaha. So it's a Bahurihi. And therefore, Shashti Purusham Ramaha Bahurihim Maheshwaraha. Rameshwara Pade. And then they took their dispute to Brahma to settle. And Brahma Karmadhare Mabravit. Brahma said, no, both of you are wrong. So the correct is Ramascha Ishwarascha. So Ramascha so Ishwarascha. So he is himself Rama and he is himself Ishwara. And therefore it is Karmadharya Samasa. Now, We have witty statements describing our Lord. For example, making use of the first letters of 5 words in a particular order. Lord Shiva is described. The letters are the labials, pa, pha, ba, bha, ma. The shloka says, Pinaka Phani Bhalendu Bhasma Mandakini Yuta Pavarga Rachita Murti Apavarga Pradayini. So look at Lord Shiva. He is constituted of items in the Pavarga. So namely Pinaka, his bow, Phani, the serpent all over his body, Bhalendu, the young moon, the crescent moon, Bhasma, the ashes on his body, and Mandakini, the river Ganga. So these 5 constitute the body of Lord Shiva. So Pavarga Rachita Murtihi, and yet it gives Apavarga Pradayini. So Apavarga stands for moksha, and therefore this body is made of Pavarga, but it gives Apavarga. So there is a play on the 2 meanings of the word Pavarga here and Apavarga. So you can see the contrast. So you can also see the wit in making use of numbers 1 to 8 in the description of Ganesha. So it says, Yekarada Dvaimatura Nistriguna Chaturbhujo Panchakara Deyashanmukhanute Saptachada Gandhi Madan Ashta Tanutanaya. Yekarada, he has only 1 tooth, Dvaimatura, 2 mothers, Nistriguna, he is beyond the 3 gunas, Chaturbhujopi Panchakara, he has 4 arms, yet he has 5 hands, because his own Shunda Danda is another Kara. And then Jaya Shanmukhanuta, he is saluted by Shanmukha, and Saptachada Gandhi Mada. So he has the Mada, the Aika, that reminds one of the Saptachada, 7-leaved plantain, and Ashtatanutanaya, and you are the son of Lord Shiva of 8 forms or bodies. And therefore, here you can see the same sequence of numbers 1 to 8 is very well employed here. Now, description of various professions, description of animals, etc., are all very well exploited in Sanskrit to bring out the humorous situations. Now, there is this marriage of the camels, Ushpranancha Vivaheshu, and the musicians and the bards, there are the donkeys, Geetam Gayanti Gardabhaha, and they praise each other, Parasparam Prashamsanti. Aho Rupam, the donkeys sing how charming the camels are. Aho Dhvani, and the camels in turn return the compliment, saying, what a nice voice that you have. So this is the way to live, especially in modern society. You must always have MAS, Mutual Admiration Society, if you want to survive. So that is the way things have to go. There is this famous verse which everybody will have heard, Markatasya Surapanam. So already it is a monkey. Monkey is known for its extreme fickleness. And so when somebody has made the monkey drink, so drink wine, so Markatasya Surapanam, Tasya Vrishchika Damshanam, and has suddenly been bitten by a scorpion. Tanmadhye Bhuta Sanchara, and there is also a Bhutavesha. And then you must see the grandeur of the situation, Yadva Tadva Bhavishyati. So it only means it is totally unpredictable in its behavior. The expression Yadva Tadva Bhavishyati occurs also in Kalivadambana Kavya, describing the situation with doctors. So what do doctors do? So they take the root of some tree or the other, Yasya Kasya Taror Moolam, and mix it with something or the other, Yenekenapi Mishritam, and give it to somebody or the other, Yasmai Kasmai Pradatavyam, and the consequence will be Yadva Tadva Bhavishyati, and therefore that is going to result in any kind of chaotic situation. Now, when you give something to a person who is unworthy of something, you can see to what funny uses or criminal uses it can be put into. So, in the Natyashastra of Bharata, we find the definition of Hasirasa, where he says Paracheshtanukarana dhasaha samupajayati. So hasa or Hasirasa is born when somebody just imitates somebody else very well. So even there it happens very well. Haso nama paracheshtanukarana kuhaka asambadha pralapa pauro bhagya maurkhya adibhir vibhavaihi samutpadyate. So apart from paracheshtanukarana, so it is kuhaka, asambadha pralapa, when you speak ill of somebody, so knowingly and with bad intentions, and you speak in an irrelevant manner, and when your censorious given to finding faults and idiocy and so on. So idrishihi vibhavaihi samutpadyate, and it also says it can be atmastha and parastha. Now here is a situation where somebody has presented a monkey with a hara. Haram vakshasi kenapi dattam agnena markataha ledhi jigrati sankshipya karot yunnata mananam. So presented a necklace of pearls. What does the monkey do? Haram vakshasi kenapi dattam agnena markataha. Some idiot has done this, and then lady, it licks the necklace, and then jigrati smells that, sankshipya karot yunnata mananam, and it holds it tight and looks in some direction and so on. So this is the fate of many of the vidyas when they go to the wrong hands, and you can see today the fate of many of our vidyas at the hands of many Westerners who are only making a caricature of the same and mishandling that and giving very wrong interpretations and misapplying them and so on. So this is the age of a good deal of misinformation and disinformation, both out of ignorance and out of malice. And you can see all the disastrous and unwelcome consequences, as in the case of pearls being cast before swine. Now, I can bring out the beauty of another shloka, caricaturing the doctors. So it says, Vaidyaraja Namastubhyam. It's a very famous shloka. Most of the Sanskritists will have known this verse. Yamaraja Sahodara is described as the brother of Lord Yama himself. Yamastu Harate Pranan. So it is Yama who is better than the doctors, because Yama takes away only your life, but the doctor takes your money also away. So Vaidya Pranan Dhananicha. Another verse takes a more serious look at the situation of a chita, a funeral fire being burned. He had been on a visit to a neighboring village, and while returning to his own village, he sees the funeral fire burning there in the cemetery, and he says, Chitam Prajwalitam Drishtva Vaidyo Vismayamayo. So he was taken by surprise, or perhaps even shocked. Nahangato name bhrata kasyedam hastalagam. I did not handle this case, nor did my brother. Then whose trick is there? So that somebody has died, and so we see his funeral. There is a verse making a caricature of a Buddhist bhikshu. So somebody catches a Buddhist monk eating flesh, and he asks, Bhikshu, mamsana shevanam kimuchitam. So you are a bhikshu and you are consuming flesh. This is proper. And the bhikshu responds saying, yes, this is my question too. What is his question? Kintena madhyam vina. What is the use of consuming flesh without the accompaniment of a drink? So the wine. Madhyam chapi tava priyam. And the shocked stranger asks him, so then you love to drink too? Vyamaho varanganabhisaha. Of course, I would like to drink it along with the harlots. Tasam artharuchi. And this fellow who is taken by surprise, saying that Well, those Vaishyas are known for their greed after wealth and Kutastavadhanam, where from can you get your money? Dyutena Chaurya, and the fellow casually replies, so in the game of dice and in Chaurya and acts of theft, so it is there that I make my money. And the shocked stranger asks him, Chaurya Dyuta Parigrahopi Bhavataha. So he thought it was only the Mamsa Sevana which was the worst thing, and you can see the chain of things. So do you then indulge in Chaurya and Dyuta too? And the fellow nonchalantly replies, Bhrashtasya Kavagati. So say, I slipped, and when a person has slipped, well, whatever is worth doing well, and therefore, well, this is what I have been. Now in Bhartrihari's Niti Shataka, there is a beautiful verse, and it shows how the thing that we would love to depend the most upon, namely love of fellow beings, so it can be very tricky and treacherous. So there is a story behind that, and I will not go into the story, which you all know most probably. So it says, the king Bhartrihari, the cause for the Vairagya of Bhartrihari was this situation. So it is a situation of A, B, C, D, E, 5 persons. So Yam Chinta Yami Sadatam Mai Sa Viraktam. I am interested in somebody, but she is not interested in me. And she is interested rather in somebody else. Sapyanyam Ichhati Janam. So, and that man loves some other woman. Sajano Anyasaktaha. And here is a situation where some other woman, so maybe that very lady of whom he just referred to, Asmat Kritecha Parishiti Kachidanya. So she's yearning for me, and he says, Dik Tancha Tancha Madanancha Imancha Mancha, spy upon all these and upon Madana or Manmatha. And it is that situation which inspired him to take up sannyasa, is what the verse says. Here is a situation of a conversation between two rustic women. So it is the most charming thing when we see the ignorant who are quarreling among themselves and each trying to outwit the other. It was Mark Twain's formula. So, namely, he says the secret of success is a combination of ignorance and arrogance. So, it is that combination. So, a great deal of ignorance and immense confidence. That is a sure recipe for success. So, that's what he said. Now, he is in a situation where a woman boasts about her own husband. Chaturas Sakhime Bharata, Etanena Likitam Parona Vacheti. What he writes, nobody can understand. So, none else can. And the other saying, Tasmadapi Chaturome, my husband beats your husband because Swayamapi Likitam Swayamna Vacheti. So, what he writes, he himself cannot figure out, leave alone others. This is quite comparable to the situation in the modern days where an astrologer, it seems, said, looking at the handwriting of a schoolboy, so going by his handwriting, I think he is destined to become a doctor, because the doctors are probably known for an undecipherable handwriting. So here are the two women competing with each other. Now, there is this shloka which goes to deride Panini himself. Now, one woman was fastening a garland, and she was juxtaposing the most incongruous things together. So, a piece of glass, a gem, and a bit of gold and all that. Kacham manim kanchana meka sutre. So, in a single thread, grathnasi bale kimidam vichitram. You are fastening them all together. So, what is this incongruity? Somebody asks. And that's the intelligent girl. She knew one sutra of Panini. Shvayo Maghonam Atadhite. So she says, Vishesha with Panini Eka Sutre, Shwanam Yuvanam Maghavanam Uche. Didn't Panini himself bring out in one sutra, so bring together in one sutra, Shwan, Yuvan, and Maghavan, and therefore Shwan is a dog, Yuvan is a youth, and Maghavan is Lord Indra himself. There is the situation in a hostel where there was an idiotic student, and all students, his fellow mates, used to laugh at him. And especially at the time of their sitting for food, sitting together for food, they would laugh at him and crack jokes against him and so on. So, and he became very worried. So he was not intelligent and he could not give them a befitting reply. And therefore, once he went to his teacher and said, all my friends ridicule me, especially while we sit for food. So I do not know what to do. Seeing the stupidity and innocence of the boy, the teacher said, okay, I'll give you a mantra. And if you say that mantra so loud enough, then nobody will ridicule you from the next day. So the student learned very hard that mantra. And then the next day, he made that, he pronounced that mantra aloud, and everybody laughed very much louder than the way they laughed all these days. But then they stopped from the next day. So they stopped laughing at him from the next day. Now, what was the mantra that was taught by the Guru? It is Siddha Sadhanam Doshaha. If you are trying to prove what is very evident, what is axiomatic, then that can be called a fault. So, which is to say that you are only trying to prove my ignorance, which is, after all, very clear and very obvious. So there is a verse which says, which involves what can be called bathos. So bathos is a figure of speech that was first presented by Milton, it is said. And bathos is a sort of an anti-climax. So wherein you begin with something sublime and end with something ridiculous. Now there is this shloka which says, which asks about what is the big and the mighty thing in life. Now one fellow says, Girir Mahan, see, mountains are massive. And another fellow says, Girir Abdhi, the ocean is bigger than the mountain. And Girir Abdhir Mahan, and another fellow says, Abdher Nabho Mahatu, so bigger than the ocean is the sky. And then another fellow says, Nabhasopi Mahad Brahma, and Brahman is indeed bigger than even the sky. And there comes a fat reply, Tato Pyasha Gariyasi. So the desires of man, they are endless. So one can perhaps reach the end of the sky, but one can never reach the end of one's own desires. And therefore, Tato Pyasha Gariyasi. Therefore, Asha is greater than Brahman himself or itself. So thus the sweeping nature of man's endless desires is very well brought out in this verse. Another verse ridicules the kripana, the miserly. Kripanena samodata na bhuto na bhavishyati. So we all think that the kripana is a person who doesn't spare a pie for this, even for the most deserving, even for the one who is in distress and so on. But this shloka says there is none to equal him in his generosity. Why? How? Sprishaneva vittani yah parebhya priyachati. So if anybody wants to donate some money to another, he has to take the money in his hand and hand it over to the other. But this fellow, Kripana, so he doesn't even touch his money, but then leaves it behind for others. So Sprishaneva vittani yah parebhya priyachati. So it is to drive home a lesson. So most of these shlokas have a message to give, and it shows how if you do not really enjoy your wealth and give it away to others, then it ultimately it will get lost. So if parebhyah prayachati, he is going to give it to somebody else. Another sloka brings out semantic incongruity. Now we have all heard the sentence of Noam Chomsky, the colorless green ideas are sleeping furiously. This sentence is given as an example of a grammatically correct sentence, so which, however, does not make anything, give any sensible meaning. You can see that there is a great difference in the very definition of grammar. So in the East and the West. So Vyakarana and grammar are not the same. And therefore, there is no question of a sentence, so which can be called a valid sentence, so which involves incongruity. So Agnina Sinchati is invalidated as a sentence, and therefore the Karakakanksha Purti itself is the first requirement of a sentence, and it is only that which can be grammatically right and so on. So, but here is one sentence: Yesha Vandhyasato Yati. Now, this is so a sort of Vadato Vyaghata, as they say in logic. So, here is the son of a barren woman. So, and then he has adorned himself Kapushpa Krita Shekharaha, with the flowers that grow in the sky. There can be no such flower. There can be no son of a barren woman. Mrigadrishnam bhasis nataha, and is taken bath in a mirage, so there is really no water in any mirage. Shashashranka dhanurdharaha, and he also carries a bow, dhanus, made of the horns of a rabbit. Rabbits have no horn at all, no horns at all. The funny situation of the sudden visit of somebody to our house can sometimes lead to very embarrassing situations or very funny situations. So Westerners make a fetish of somebody coming to their house with a prior appointment. So sudden visits are frowned upon, and here is a situation where Lord Vishnu came to the house of Lord Shiva without prior appointment. Vishnu Ragamanam Nishamya, so hearing that Lord Vishnu is arriving, Sahasa Kritva Phanindram Gunam. So Lord Shiva immediately took a serpent and made him the rope, Kaupinam Paridhaya. So he put on the Kaupina. So Charma Karinaha, it was the skin of the elephant hide. Shambhu Puro Dhavati. So obviously Shambhu had to receive Lord Vishnu, and he ran to receive him. Drishtva Vishnu Ratham. So, but as Vishnu, even as Vishnu was descending from his vehicle, the Garuda, so Vishnu Ratha, the Sarpa, so now begin to tremble. Sakampa Hridayaha Sarpopatad Bhutale. So the serpent fell down upon the earth, and then Krittir Viskhalita, and therefore the Gaja Charma that he was wearing also slipped down. Khriyavanata Mukho, Nagno Haraf Patavaha. So Lord Shiva, so who tried to cover himself up at the last moment, failed in his attempt, and may that Shiva, who was thus embarrassed, may he protect us. So it only shows the tricky situation there. There are also verses which bring out beautiful plays on words. Even the very opening verse we saw a beautiful play on words. But here is a small verse which has its own brand of play on words. It describes Lord Shiva. It says, Vamangi kata Vamangi Kundali Bhuta Kundali Avirastu Purovastu Bhuti Bhuti Ambarambaram. So it looks like there is a lot of repetition of words, but it does make sense. Vamangi krita Vamangi. So he has made the woman that is Vamangi. So a woman with beautiful limbs is called a Vamangi. And she, Lord Shiva has made her, that is Parvati, the left limb, Vama Anga. Vamangi Krita Vamangi. Kundali Bhuta Kundali. The Kundalini Sarpa has been made the Kundala, or the one that is wound around his hands and his arms and so on. And Avirastu Purovastu, may that entity appear before ourselves, present before ourselves. Bhuti, Bhuti, Ambarambaram, which has Bhuti as its Bhuti and Ambara as its Ambara. Ambara means the sky, and Lord Shiva is known as Digambara, Rakashambara, and so on. And therefore, he is Ambara. So the two words of Ambara are exploited here. The two meanings of the word Ambara are exploited here. And even so, the word Bhuti, which also has two meanings. So Bhuti, Bhuti, the ashes are the marks on his body, and therefore may that Shiva protect you. There is a verse which brings out the fate of harlot. So everybody will have heard the last portion of this verse, namely Vriddha Nari Pativrata. So the old woman, so she is very faithful to her husband. But the earlier portion of this verse shows how she was in her former life. Although Veshya, so in the beginning she was but a harlot. Punardasi, then worked as a servant. Paschat Bhavati, Kuttini, and then she is a sort of a headhunter, so for other women and so on. So Sarvopaya Parikshina Vriddha Nari Pativrata. So now that she cannot make a living out of any means, now she has become very faithful to her husband. Now this verse, most of these verses are all anyoktis. It's not intended to criticize a particular person or a particular situation or person in a particular situation and so on. So these are all what I have called a sort of proxy metaphors. So they serve as an indicator of a situation which can be applied variously. And even the shlokas on the monkey, for example, so which we saw, so many of the proverbs are also full of the anyoktis, and many of these verses are to be taken as anyoktis. So another verse ridicules the astrologer. It says, Ganayati Gagane Ganakaha Chandrena Samagamam Vishakhayaha. So here is an astrologer who is calculating when the moon will be in the Vishakha nakshatra and on that. But Vivida Bhujanga Krida Sattam Grihinim na Janat. He doesn't know his own wife, so he's sporting with other men and so on. So it only shows that we are very careful in some regards, but utterly careless in other regards and so on. Speaking of goldsmiths, there is no language in the world which does not have some proverb regarding goldsmith. So the goldsmith, and this shloka says that the mountain Meru, so is quite far away. Do you know the reason? Meru sthitoti dure manushya bhumim param parityajya. So going far away from the realm of the humans. Why? Bhito bhayena chauryat. The mountain is afraid of theft by dhiranam hemakaranam. So by the ghoranam hemakaranam, by these horrendous goldsmiths, so who definitely snatch everything, and even from their own kith and kin. There is another verse which wittily says how wise men spend their time. It says, Pratar Dyuta Prasangena. The morning hours they spend with the Dyuta, so game of dice. Madhyane Stri Prasangataha. And the afternoons, so dalliance with women. Pratrau Chora Prasangena. And then during night times, with the activities of thieves. Kalo Gachati Dhimatam. That's how wise men or men of intelligence spend their time. obviously, the apparent meaning is different from the real or the intended meaning. So it says, in the morning hours, they read the Mahabharata. So, Pratar Dvita Prasangena, so the central situation of which is the game of dice played by Yudhishthira and others. Madhyanhe Stri Prasangataha. So, and then during the afternoon hours, they read the Bhagavata. So, and then Ratrau Chor, or rather, it is regarding the Ramayana, where Sita has been stolen by Ravana. And then Ratrau Chora Prasangena, and during the night times, so it deals with the other story of Krishna stealing things and so on. So Bhagavata, Kalo Gachati Dhimatam. In a good deal of yogic literature, we have a special language called Sandha Bhasha. So sometimes they use a language which has an absurd meaning apparently, but a real different meaning is there embedded. So, for example, this shloka says that if you want to attain the high position of Lord Vishnu, then you must rape the young widow between Ganga and Yamuna. Ganga Yamunayor Madhye Bala Randam Tapasvinim. Tapasvinim means the poor woman. Balaskarena Grinhiyat Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. And of course, the explanation of this is given in the yogic texts themselves. There is a reference to Ganga and Yamuna as the nadis, namely Ida and Pingala, and the Balarandam Tapasini is referred to referring to the Sushumna nadi, and then Balatkarena Grinhiyat Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. So a certain amount of force is required for the mind and the prana to enter the Sushumna nadi, and therefore there are certain hatha yogic methods culminating in the Raja yogic attainments, and this amount of exertion that is required is what is referred to as Balatkarena Grinhiyat. So Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam, and it's only when the person passes through, there is his mind and his prana pass through the Sushumna nadi, that he will be able to attain that supreme goal. There is a beautiful verse in Kuvalayananda in Chandraloka, so where there is a question of mutual confusion, and that itself indicates a sort of a humorous situation. Palasha Kusuma Bhrantya Shukatunde Patatyalihi Sopi Jambupala Bhrantya Tamalim Grastum. So thinking it to be Palasha, which is very red in color, Shukatunde Patatyalihi, the bee approaches the beak of the parrot, and Sopi Jambupala Bhrantya, and the parrot on its part thinks of the bee as the Jambupala, so the purple fruit, and Tamalim Grastamichati, and it goes to catch hold of the bee, so on. There is another verse of a bald man. Is also a very famous verse of Bhartrihari. Khalvato Divadeshwarasya Kirnai Santapito Mastake. So this bald fellow couldn't bear the heat of the sun, and therefore he went and stood beneath a tala tree. Vanchan Desha Manatapam Vidhivashat Talasya Mulangataha. By eternal fate, he went and stood under the shade of a tala tree. And Tatrapyasya Mahaphalena Patata Bhagnam Sashabdam Shiraha. And the tala fruit is very big and heavy, and suddenly a tala fruit fell upon his head, and his head was indeed broken. Bhagnam Sashabdam Shiraha, with a big sound. And the message is Prayogachati Yatra Bhagyarahitaha Tatreva Yanti Apadaha. So wherever an ill-fated person goes, the problems of his life also accompany him even there. I came across a beautiful amendment by an intelligent fellow, so who said, "Prayo gacchati tatra daivarahitaha yatraiva yanti apadaha." So, so he will definitely go to that very place where trouble him. So this shloka beautifully brings out how the ill-fated often go to problems where they will be pestered by other problems. Another verse describes the situation with the beggar. It says, "Trinadapi laghustulaha." So cotton is lighter than trina, the grass. Tuladapi cha yachakaha. And the beggar is in a way lighter than even a piece of cotton. Of course, the reference is to days till recently when cotton was very cheap. Now even cotton cloths have become costly. Vayuna kinna nito. So when somebody referred to, he made light of the beggar, saying that the beggar is indeed thinner than and lighter than even cotton. The fellow asked, "Vayuna kinna nito." So if he is so light, then why would not the wind carry him away? And Pat can reply, "Mamayam prarthayiditi." So the beggar would perhaps beg even me, and therefore that's why it has not been carried away by the wind. There is a description of a miserly fellow, a curmudgeon. Lubdho na visrajatyartham naro daridri shankaya. The miserly fellow would not give away his money, so because he suspects that he may become poor. And datapi visrajatyartham tayeva khalu shankaya. Datapi visrajatyartham tayeva khalu shankaya. And even the person who is very generous, he would give away wealth on those very grounds. You can see how the same reason leads people of different approaches and mindsets to reach very different conclusions and almost exactly opposite behavior. So another shloka ridicules the person who does not give his riches away to the needy, and nor does he enjoy himself. There is a beautiful verse in Sanskrit, a word in Sanskrit. So the word for enemy is arati. And how is that word derived? Rati means dadati. So he who does not give anything to anybody is arati. So the first sign of good friendship is dadati pratigrinhati guhyamakhyati prichhati bhunkte bhojayate chaishadvidam priti lakshanam. And therefore, he who does not give, so is arati, or the enemy. In fact, even the Vedic word namuchi also refers to a person who is very close-fisted, na munchati, so he does not give anything to anybody. And such a person who gives nothing to anybody, so is ridiculed in this verse and is compared to the third gender, nadatun nopabhoktuncha shaknoti kripanaha shriyam. So the kripana, he is not capable of giving his riches to the worthy, nor does he enjoy. Kintu sprishati hastena. So he would just touch his money now and then and feel joyous. And he is therefore compared to napumsaka iva striyam, just as the napumsaka. So he can only touch his wife, and he thinks that itself is the great source of enjoyment and nothing more. Another person asks, if by neither tyaga nor bhoga, the person considers himself, the miserly considers himself a rich man, tyaga bhoga vihinena dhanena dhanino yadi, people can become rich like that. Bhavamah kin natena iva dhanena dhanino vayam. Then in that case, without having money also, aren't we rich enough? So this is the way it's asked. Another person says, oh, we are misled by Panini because thinking it to be of a neuter gender, Navumsaka miti jnatva priyayi preshitam manaha, I sent my mind to my beloved, tatu tatayvaramate, and it chooses to dwell just there and finds its enjoyment, and therefore hata Panini namayam. So we are indeed misled by Panini. Another verse says, Yasi Shashti Chaturthi cha Vihasya cha Vihaj. This fellow is poor in grammar. He thinks that Vihasya is Shashti Vibhakti, as in Ramasya, and Vihaya, like Ramaya, must be Chaturthi Vibhakti. So we know that both are Lebanta Avyayas and they are Avyayas, and therefore it cannot be possible to parse them like that. Aham Katham Dvitiyasya, so Dvitiyasya Maham Katham. So if Aham and Katham are like Ramam and therefore parsed as in Dvitiya Vibhakti, how can I be his wife? Dvitiya Syamaham Katham. Now this is the situation of a Vadhu conducting Vara Pariksha. So before marrying, she just wanted to test his knowledge of Sanskrit, and therefore she gave him the question paper. Parse these words, these 4 words, Vihasya, Vihaya, and then Aham and Katham. So he failed in the elementary test, and she says, how can I marry a person of this standard? And that's why they say, even if you do not study much, study a bit of grammar at least. Yes, yadyapi bahunadhishe tathapi pathaputre vyakaranam. Otherwise, swajana shvajano mabhut. If you do not know the difference between sa and sha, so the dantya sa and then the talavya sha, then swajana shvajano mabhut. You will not know the difference between swajana and shvajana. So swajana is one's own kith and kin, and shvajana is dogs, and then sakala shakalaha. So sakala is the entirety, and shakala is but a small portion. And sakrit, shakrit, sakrit means once, and shakrit refers to the cow dung. In fact, this possibility of confusion between this sa and sha is exploited by Valmiki himself. And Sita being surrounded by the Rakshasis is described by sage Valmiki as Swaganena yathahinam Shwaganer avritamiva. So Parvati was a bereft of people who were her own. So there was no Swajana, and the Rakshasis that were surrounding her were like Shwajana. So they were like nothing but the fierce dogs and so on. So we have found very many aspects of the humor in Sanskrit. There are numerous other verses. I have only covered some 60% of the verses that I have collected. I think we have come to the end of the time that is allotted to me. Perhaps I must recollect only 2 verses from Bhoja Prabandha, so and close this talk. So there was this poetaster who wanted to compose some verse on King Bhoja, and as Bhoja was known for his great generosity, giving Akshara Laksha and so on. So he has composed a verse, and Kalidasa says, okay, you present your verse, I'll be there to take care of things. So he says, Uttishta Uttishta Rajendra, Mukham Prakshalayasva. So the first thing that a person does, so he is washing one's face. But he found that Mukham Prakshalayasva is only 7 letters. So there must be one more letter that is required for filling the pada. And then Pratarahayate Kukkutaha. So the cock is crowing in the morning. And there he found that there was 1 letter in excess. Pratarahayate Kukkutaha has 9 letters. And therefore he took the last letter Taha to the second pada end, so where 1 akshara was missing. And therefore he said Pratarahayate Kukku, whereas the second pada was given as Uttishthotishth Rajendra Mukham Prakshalayasva Taha. And the last pada, he found it extremely difficult to complete, and he filled it with expletives. So cha, vai to he, cha, vai to he. So these four are used in rare cases where you find no word that can exactly fit in, and therefore you have to fill in the blank, and therefore you have to, as a slot filler, you just use cha or vai or tu or he, and this fellow made use of all of them and twice to fill the 8 aksharas required for the anushtup pada. The other verse is asthivat dadhivat chaiva kushtavat pishtavat tatha rajam stava yashobhati vruddha brahmana romo. The convention, the poetic convention, is to describe fame as white in color. So this fellow had composed on shloka, so saying, "O king, your fame is white." So, and what is a poet if you cannot give comparisons or series of comparisons? Therefore, he said, so what are the white things? He began to probe and remembered that the bone is white in color. Therefore, asthivat. And the curds, they are white in color. Dadhivat chaiva. And while he was coming to the asthana, he saw a person with kushta roga. So he said kushtavatu. And at home there was this the floor. So pishtavat tatha rajam stava yashobhati. O king, your fame is shining like all these things. And he found it extremely difficult to fill in the last pada. And he remembered that old men have gray hair and white hair, and therefore vruddha brahmana romavati. So like the Roma of a vruddha brahmana. So Kalidasa said, okay, you replace the second half by what I give. So he said, asthivat dadhivat chaiva pishtavat kushtavat tatha rajas Sharat Chandra Marichivat. The last pada was the one that was replaced by Kalidasa. He said Sharat Chandra Marichivat. So it's like the rays of the moon in the Sharadritu, the autumnal season. And when he read out that verse, and especially when he heard the last pada, King Bhoja suddenly feigned anger and questioned him. Tell me the truth. Wasn't the last pada created by Kalidasa? And then he shivered and said yes. And Kalidasa was there to support him, and he said he's a very poor man, and therefore give him some help and all that, and therefore the king was generous, and so that is how he was saved. I may end the talk with one verse, so which describes an innocent, faithful, rustic woman. So, who, when her husband was about to start on a tour, so for business and so on, so he said, "Yami vidha abhyudite punareshyam." So I'm now going, and after my stars are on the ascendant, that is, after I acquire some riches, so when my vidhi is favorable to me, I'll return. Yami vidhau abhyudite punareshyami iti vadati dhave. So when the husband was saying like this, that innocent lady, so jana chidanta matram nedan tattvantu mugdha udhohu, that innocent woman, she thought that he is going to come back that very night. So why? Because the word vidhau abhyudite, the word vidhau is the saptami ekavachana not only of vidhi, which is what was meant by the husband, but also of vidhu, the moon. When the moon rises, I will be back. So that is the meaning that she took out of that. So janati udanta matram. Udanta is ukaranta. So vidhu of vidhu shabda. Na idantatvantu mugdhavadu. Not the idanta. So the vidhi shabda is ikaranta, ending in short e. So that she could not realize, and she thought that by the time of moonrise she would be back, and therefore she was eagerly looking forward to his return very soon, and so on. So sometimes we can only smile at the innocence of such women, such a loving wife, and so on. But what is indeed appreciable is how the poet has exploited the morphological equivalence of the Vidhi Shabda and Vidhu Shabda in a particular vibhakti and vachana to bring out the innocence of the woman. There are many classifications of Hasita in Bharata's Natya Shastra, ranging from a very gentle smile to the Attahasa and so on. For sheer lack of time, I'm not going into those details. So I think in the course of my talk, we have come across at least a few verses which can be considered humorous, so, or at least witty. And I hope I have placed before you a few verses that could really be enjoyed for the reasons that I have stated and for certain other reasons also. So I end my talk with this, and I'm thankful to Vyoma Linguistics Lab for inviting me to share a few thoughts regarding wit and humor in Sanskrit. So namaskar, and thanks all of you for your patient hearing. Namaskar.
In his usual inimitable way, Professor K.S. Kannan has given us a very engaging insight into humor and wit as a natural way of life and expression in Samskrita. This is actually a very important aspect to understand and appreciate. As Sir mentioned at the beginning of his talk, laughing will not block our way to Swarga or Moksha. It is indeed a very interesting and unique aspect of Bharatiya Chintana, right? So we maintain the ideal of Sarvam Brahmamayam, right? Perceiving the highest truth in everything. But at the same time, we also perceive the inherent triviality, which allows us to look at everything through the lens of humor without hurting or offending others, while also not taking offense ourselves with such things. Right? So it's extraordinary that this outlook is built into Samskrita Bhasha and Sahitya. So which is usually looked upon as something very serious, only for spiritual or dry. But right from the Mangala Shloka of a drama to a Niti Kavya, Shastras like Vyakarana, Nyaya, Yoga. So everywhere we are open to seeing and incorporating Hasya Rasa. Right? So our poets have endeavored to bring out that smile in the listener by resorting to so many nuances of the language. I'm sure that is also something that all of us have picked up. So this humor derives from the language, right? The samasa, shlesha, the last example he mentioned, just that saptami of vidhi and vidhu both being vidhau, right? So many things can add to this aspect of Samskrita, and we are extremely grateful to Professor K.S. Kannan for enlightening us today regarding these humorous and witty aspects of Samskrita. They flow so naturally and gracefully through the literature, but are often overlooked for various reasons. So even a normal conversation with Kannan sir is usually sprinkled generously with many of these nuggets. It was indeed a treat to have 1 whole hour of such fantastic verses. So Baddhena Anjalina Natena Shirasa Asmakam Hardam Kartagyam Nivedayamaha. We hope all of you enjoyed today's Upanyāsa, and looking forward to see you all the next week. Next Sunday, we will have an Upanyāsa by Professor Amba Kulkarni on Sanskrit computational linguistics, opportunities for research. So let us end today's session with a Shanti mantra. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Thank you,
ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಸರ್. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ.